Hey everybody, Operation Z here. We're picking up where we left off in Joseph's story, and we did Joseph's story part 14 in the last video we did, but now we're on part 15. So in part 15, 14 where we left off, pretty much, the butler remembers his fault that he didn't do what Joseph asked him to do and just pretty much remind Pharaoh or tell Pharaoh, hey, this person has interpreted dreams and helped me out. Like, he could have said and asked something of Pharaoh for a favor or something like that, and then Pharaoh could have freed Joseph from the prison or any number of things. But he's basically like, well, I remember my fault this day. And then there was a man that interpreted the dreams of both me, the chief butler, and also of the baker, and the interpretations of our dreams came true. And now it's convenient because Pharaoh's had all these dreams and everything that's happened concerning these dreams, and now the butler tells Pharaoh of Joseph. So Pharaoh fetches Joseph out of the prison, and he shaves himself and gets ready, and he comes and is before Pharaoh, king of Egypt, right here. So we're going to continue with the story there in Genesis chapter 41 verse 15. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I have dreamed a dream, and there is none that can interpret it, and I have heard say of thee that thou canst understand a dream to interpret it. So Pharaoh's just saying, hey, I've had this dream, and I understand that you can interpret dreams from what I've heard from my chief butler. You can interpret dreams, and you can do all of these things that, pretty much my butler's told me you can do, and I'm inquiring from you to see if this is indeed true. And then in 16, Genesis chapter 41, verse 16, and Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, it is not in me, God shall give Pharaoh an answer of peace. So Joseph very humbly, is saying, well, the gift is not in me, but my God will give Pharaoh an answer of peace. My God will give you an answer of peace concerning your dreams and tell you what your dreams mean and what is to come to pass from your dreams and all these things that are taking place. So, he's just saying God will give Pharaoh an answer of peace. God will help you understand what your dreams mean. And then he just pretty much tells Joseph the dreams, and when we remember back to what the dreams were, it was the 7 fat and well-favored kind that fed in the meadow or by the river, and then 7 sleek and looked like they're starving, really skinny kind, which are water cows, came and devoured the 7 healthy and well ones. And then he awoke from that, and then he went back to bed, and then 7 ears of corn that were well favored and healthy and good, 7 other ones come and eat it. And then, pretty much it's a deeply symbolic dream, and it's, there's a lot of symbolisms in it, and we'll see what the 7 means, because 7's a significant number with it, and then what they are, that it has to do with the good of the land, the fat kind, and then the ears of corn, like it's the goods of the land and stuff like that. But we're going to see the interpretation of pretty much everything that God has for Pharaoh through Joseph. So verse 25, Genesis chapter 41 verse 25 says this. All right. And Joseph said unto Pharaoh, the dream of Pharaoh is one. God hath shewed Pharaoh what he is about to do. So both the dreams, because it was dreamed twice, is actually meaning that it was established by God, which I believe he covers too at some point in here. But pretty much that the dreams that he dreamed were two and they are one. Said unto Pharaoh, the dream of Pharaoh is one. God hath shewed Pharaoh what he's about to do. And, he's just letting Pharaoh know what the first part of the dream means. And then in 26, 7 good kine are 7 years, and the 7 good years are 7 years. The dream is one. So we see that number 7 is 7 years. I mean, 7 years, a good 7 years with the 7 good kine and the 7 good ears of corn. That pretty much, it's meaning that it's good and it's a good symbolism, this first part of it. But then when we read here, Genesis chapter 41, verse 27, and the 7 thin and ill-favored kine that came up after them are 7 years, and the 7 empty ears blasted with the east wind shall be 7 years of famine. So, that being said, 7 thin and ill-favored kine that came up after them are 7 years, and the 7 empty ears blasted with the east wind shall be 7 years of famine. So there's the 7 good years that we get from the interpretation of the dreams of Pharaoh that God shows to Pharaoh twice, 7 good years twice, and then also 7 bad years is what's being revealed here. So right here he reveals the 7 empty ears blasted with the east wind shall be 7 years of famine. That they're going to have 7 years of famine, and all this is to take place. We see that through the text here. And we read Genesis chapter 41, verse 28. This is the thing which I have spoken unto Pharaoh, what God is about to do, he sheweth unto Pharaoh. So, pretty much right here, this is the thing that he's saying, as I have spoken unto you, Pharaoh, what God is about to do, he sheweth unto Pharaoh. And Pharaoh's shown all this stuff because, one, much good is to come Joseph's way, I feel like, which was God's plan for Joseph to prosper this way, and also for Jacob and all of Israel to come into the land of Egypt later on, and all this stuff that takes place and happens. Like it all ties in to God's plans and God's purposes. And then also Pharaoh's shown so they can save up and store the food and the grain so that everybody can have what they need and everybody can just be able to survive through this famine. And pretty much, because it's going to be a rough famine of 7 years. A big 7-year famine that just takes place, and it's a lot that the people are going to have to endure through. And everybody's going to be coming to Egypt to get that corn and that grain. And I've covered this in the other video, but I have to re-go over it now. And we're kind of jumping ahead of the story a little bit. But, it's just to point out that, pretty much God has a plan and a purpose for what he's doing here with, just telling them what's going on and with the famine and everything that's going on concerning this famine that's going to take place. That it's revealed onto Joseph, everything that is going to happen, that, pretty much Joseph can interpret all the dreams. Like he has that gift and that ability from God that he's just freely given, that he can do it. If the dreams have meaning and whatnot, And we see here what God is about to do, he sheweth unto Pharaoh. So what God's getting ready to do and everything that's going to happen has been showed unto Pharaoh. So then in 29, Genesis chapter 41, verse 29, behold, there come 7 years of great plenty throughout all the land of Egypt. And, it's about planning and preparation, like they're being told in advance that this is going to happen, right? So pretty much what they're going to have to do is prepare for it. And there's a message in there too for us that, being prepared in our lives and, not like it's actually a virtuous thing, say with your money, to not blow all of your money and all of your income on crazy things in a riotous kind of way. That saving is actually a virtue. It's not impulsive, buy everything up and not have anything saved up. Because in the case here with Egypt, if they didn't save and do what they were doing here, it pretty much would have been that it would have been a lot worse than the outcome. And shouldn't really dwell too much with money and stuff, but putting money up and saving just would seem like a good thing to learn from this Old Testament text right here. And just something that we learn from the scriptures, and when we look into it, pretty much can learn from that, just not spending everything and, pretty much wasting everything you get, and kind of having a little bit of a conservative nature. Some of us are a little more impulsive than others when it comes to certain things that, if it comes to eating or drinking or, even, it goes beyond just the terms of money. Sometimes we're big spenders when it comes to life too. Like we want to just consume. And it takes a lot of willpower to just develop that self-control, whether it comes to food or just drinking sugary soft drink beverages and sugary sweets and alcohol and all these things like that we just got a big spender mentality, some of us, and what we have to do to overcome it is to just pray to God that he gives us some self-control through his Spirit, and that's one of the fruits of the Spirit is self-control, that we have that self-control to get into that. And there's some things that, we know that we can kind of indulge in that aren't too bad, and then there's things that can be very harmful to us if we're just sitting there taking in countless carb after carb, sugar. Eventually we're going to get obese and our body's going to be a lot less healthy. It goes beyond just the terms of money, this concept of not being a big spender. And like them, what is getting ready to happen here is Joseph's going to give a course of action for Pharaoh and what to do concerning this 7-year famine that will rapidly approach after the 7 plenteous and good years. So let's get back into the text there and see where we were at here. So basically, that God has shown it unto Pharaoh, Joseph's relaying to him. And then here, Genesis chapter 41, verse 29, behold, there come 7 years of great plenty throughout all the land of Egypt. So there comes 7 years of great plenty throughout all the land of Egypt. he's being shown that there'll be 7 plentiful years and good, like everything will go as good as it possibly can for prosperity and good in the land. And then 30, Genesis chapter 41, verse 30, and there shall rise after them 7 years of famine, and all the plenty shall be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and the famine shall consume the land. So we see that 7 years of famine, and all the plenty that shall be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and the famine shall consume the land. So it's going to be a grievous, rough sort of famine that, again, the whole East is going to have to pretty much come on to Pharaoh, as we'll see in the text with what Joseph proposes to do. And they're going to have to come on to Pharaoh for their, any grain that they need and whatnot with the food, because them and their cattle will not survive it. The cattle will die off, they'll die off. Not just their source of income, but, their very life is at stake because of this famine that's going to take place. And we read verse 31, Genesis chapter 41, verse 31, and the plenty shall not be known in the land by reason of that famine following, for it shall be very grievous. So it's going to be a very grievous famine, and the great plenty that takes place, it shall not be known or remembered, because the famine following it shall be very grievous. Like very rough, very harsh on the land, that, pretty much it's going to be a tough thing that the people have to endure. So 32, Genesis chapter 41, verse 32 says this, and for that the dream was doubled unto Pharaoh twice, it is because the thing is established by God, and God will shortly bring it to pass. So just as I said at the beginning, right here, it's the dream was doubled, 2 different types of symbolisms, yet the same meaning. Means it was established by God, and that God will shortly bring it to pass. Right here, what's mentioned. So, pretty much what they're going to have to do is not be big spenders of all the grain and whatnot that they can store, because they're going to have to spend the next 7 years saving it up. They're going to have to save it up to pretty much keep them afloat, and not just them, but all the people round about them, and pretty much it keeps Egypt there, flourishing, and, they end up getting all the land and all kinds of that stuff out of it. But pretty much, though, all that stuff that happens, God made a way that life could be preserved and saved through this famine. And we're going to see what happens with Joseph and everything that just takes place with the story. But, we see that God makes a way that everybody can just get through what's going to take place. We don't fully know the reason why there had to be this big 7-year famine. But, sometimes it's not to question why, but it's to see the good that God does, because it's shown, to Pharaoh through Joseph and all that stuff that takes place and happens, right? That pretty much, it's shown and revealed, and then all these things happens through, what Joseph tells them to do, and then they preserve it and they save it, and then they have it in great abundance later on. And again, it's like the concept with the gluttony we were talking about, and the concept with, just being more temperate with the stuff that we got instead of consuming it all like rapid fire, just being a total glutton, or very, very, drinking all your drinks and all your sodas to where there's just nothing left and you keep on having to buy more and more and more. It's that big spender mentality that it's pretty much goes beyond just money, but it's also the stuff that we have too. Pretty much you just kind of moderate yourself and learn to have that self-control. You'll be healthier and you won't have to keep spending your resources getting more stuff, more comfort foods, more of this, more of that. But it can be had in moderation. And that's just kind of a lesson that we can learn and see through the text here. Again, some stuff we can kind of indulge more in, and then there's some stuff that damages the body and the temple that God has given us. And it's called a temple, but it's more of a building and a house too, that the Spirit of God indwells within. And we keep our bodies healthier by taking care of what God's given us. We want to be fit and look good and feel good, but it's also just taking care of that building that God's blessed us with, our vessel that carries the living water of God and the Spirit of God within us. That's the message for today. You'll have a blessed day.